Hello, folks. We're back again, and I don't know if you see me. Can you say hi, Matt?
Hello. Hi.
All right. So I always get this confusion. Sometimes I'm thinking we're on gallery view, and it turns out the recording uh, shows up to be speaker view. So I guess it's a familiar face. It's again my another year of One Life Only. And I'd like to thank you, Matt, for gracing this interview again. And it's very generous of you to do this. I appreciate it.
It's nice. It has become a way of marking the calendar where I am in the year, and with it's April. So it's time for marking the anniversary of our interviews. It's the first time I think you're inviting me. I thought this year you wouldn't have any questions for me anymore, but apparently,
I think this is the second anniversary that I invited you. So because you committed this and you said that okay, every year, you can do this every year. So I said, okay, why
okay.
don't I have you
But
for
I
my
think it's the fourth
anniversary?
time. I think it's the fourth time. So you'll check, but I'm pretty sure it's the fourth time we do that. You'll check. You'll check. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe the third time we're doing it on an anniversary month.
That's possible. That's very possible. Yeah.
Yes, I've lost count. But thank you, thank you. Matthew is specializes in RFT, and right now he's doing a lot of work training people uh,
Mhm.
in ACT and RFT. Is that correct, Matt?
Yeah, I do that and some coaching also for a general audience. I work with
Yes.
clients and sort of
Uh,
mental health coaching, we can call that. Um, and yeah, trainings for therapists, coaches, educators, and ACT
yes,
RFT. Yeah.
yes. And for those who are new to Matt, his full name is Dr. Matthieu Villatte. Matthieu, is that how you pronounce it? Matthieu,
Yeah, yeah,
spelled
Matthieu.
differently. Matthieu
Yeah.
Villatte. He's originally from France, and uh, he's co-written, right?
Yeah.
Quite a few books and articles about RFT. All right,
Yeah. Yeah.
with
Yeah. Yeah.
Dr. Stephen Hayes and your ex-wife. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Okay. All right. So let's start off with our very challenging questions. I hope.
Let's go.
Anyway, this is supposed to be a casual conversation between two shrinks.
Yeah, let's keep it
So
casual. Uh,
yes. So
it's Friday. It's Friday evening for me.
I'll have
Uh,
a drink to that. So
yeah,
it's
I don't have my drink, but it's Friday evening. It's relaxed. So you want to talk about big things? Let's talk about big things and let's see where it goes.
yeah, I'm a big things guy. Well, let's start first with uh tactic or relational frames. This since this is
Okay.
your expertise. Relational frames are how we can turn language into partly our friend or partly our enemy.
Mm-hmm.
So and well, some of the things that are going on around the world really scares me a lot. So I think I don't know, for the audience who are new, one of them is seeing transcending time, place, and person, right?
Mm.
Seeing the world in the future or the past, or out there in some other place and not here now, or through the eyes of another person or behind your own
Yeah.
eyes. So that's what
Mm-hmm.
we call in RT didactic framing. And what's going on that's really problematic nowadays is what's going on in Europe, where Russia has invaded the Ukraine. And I thought about this because I just had an interview with Hank Robb, and I realized that didactic framing, maybe someone like Putin or Xi Jinping or even Donald Trump are using this relational framing skill to see that NATO is coming over, the US is trying to take over the South China Sea,
Mm.
or immigrants are about to invade our country. So, isn't that some sort of didactic framing? Because they're looking towards the future, partly causing them anxiety about the future and wanting to start to control things. Can you tell
Mm.
us more about how we can view these types of behavior uh, in from a relational frame perspective?
Yeah. Uh, so framing is a way of saying we're creating connections, basically, symbolic connections. Like it's
Yeah.
the idea that language and cognition, when we think, we make connections. And there are different ways that we can do that. Put things together as similar or different. That's a form
Mm-hmm.
of connection.
Mm-hmm.
You and I are similar in some ways, we're different in some ways. And then there's like frames of comparisons, more of this, less that. You
Mm-hmm.
can frame in terms of causality, thinking in terms of like causes and effects. And then you're talking about dialectic framing, which is a way of relating things based on perspective. So you taking perspective. And so what you're talking about here, like conflicts or points of views and disagreements, and how do we deal with that? I think one way you can interpret this process through RFT is to look at that as a multiplicity of perspectives and the difficulty of integrating all those perspectives. Uh, and there are memes about perspective taking that you can find everywhere on social media. Like you see a guy who sees there's a number written on the floor. It's a 6 or it's a 9, depending on where you are. And each
Mm-hmm.
person on each side says it's 6, and the other person says it's 9. And it's a way of showing that it's a matter of perspective, right? So it's kind of the idea here is that, yeah, if you change perspective, you'll see the world differently. Like, for example, even the way you presented the topic, there's already a perspective. You said Russia invaded Ukraine. Well, I'm guessing a lot of people in Russia would present things a different way. So
Yes.
right, it's a different perspective already.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and so I think one thing we can say is that, like, okay, well, you have different perspectives, and are they going? Can they coordinate? Can they come together? Uh,
Yes.
like if you see that meme with the 6 or the 9 written on the floor, you need that
Mm.
external perspective, the one that you have as the viewer of the meme, to say, oh yeah, there's one who sees it from one side and one who sees it from the other side, but in fact both can be true. And
Mm.
actually that would be, you could say that it's a different perspective that is able to integrate those two that seem to be incompatible perspectives. That's kind of related to another concept in another kind of frame that we call hierarchical framing or integration framing,
Mm.
where you're able to bring everything together, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, I think in a nutshell, that's how we could approach it from an RFT perspective.
Is it more like a rule following and context insensitivity? Like in our country, we have this problem of, political, what we call political dynasties, where,
Mm-hmm.
people from very rich, affluent clans dominate
Mm-hmm.
power positions of power in the government. And the innate problem, I think, with that is they tend to not develop that perspective,
Yeah.
as you said.
Yeah. Yeah.
They see a
Yeah.
9 rather than a 6.
Yeah.
So uh, they can't really see. That's why some uh, there's a, I don't know, they call it populism nowadays. People go for very quick fixes,
Yeah.
Uh, but it's because they feel like these populist leaders see the world more from their perspective, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
uh, the,
Yeah.
the poor people, they hate inflation's hurting them, or
Yeah. Yeah.
in our country, the former president uh, was able to create, let's say, a semblance of peace and order in very
Mm-hmm.
rundown neighborhoods. There are
Yeah.
less drug addicts around the streets and all that. So, but we're all limited in our context. So
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
um, I think, what do you think RFT can help with our ability to be more context sensitive?
Yeah, you're right. There can be a history of learning that leads you to stick with one perspective. Like you said, there can be
Mm,
related to rules.
yes,
So that's term that we use in RFT to talk about basically how the principles, theories, beliefs that we have about the world.
yes.
And so, for example, if there is a rule that says to not listen to certain people because they're bad, you're never going to really learn much from them. It's hard to take their perspective if you don't listen to them. We have it's talked about a lot these days with the echo chamber effect that social media or even the way you can access information happens. You choose to follow certain networks or you select certain sources, and then you end up not ever being exposed to another side. So it's like the guy on the side who sees the six, and
Yes,
there are rules that tell him that he should not ever walk around the figure, so that it should, you don't get outside your community. Don't say that you're gonna get outside. Don't ask questions or don't talk to those people over there. And as a
mm,
result, that limits to your context sensitivity. It can even be a general rule that against curiosity and openness. To the extreme, you can have communities that are so dogmatic,
mm,
like cult-like, that
yeah,
punish curiosity, asking questions. Some people will do
yes,
that with their kids, saying that if the kids ask questions, and why do we do that? Why is it? Say, well, because that's the way it is, or don't ask questions, don't question my authority. So there are lots of ways like that you can prevent perspective taking from developing, or people might still do it privately without saying anything out loud, but still, when you're not allowed to do that, or if you're not in the habit of reflecting, taking different perspectives, um, I guess it can get extinguished, or it lacks practice, and that can be a problem.
mm,
Now, the reverse, how can we help? Well, it's like engage in the shaping process of developing perspective, perspective taking. That's the kind of
mm-hmm,
things we do in therapy or coaching, right? We
mm,
ask questions to clients to reflect, take different perspectives, and in the
mm,
future, in the past, from the perspective of another person. And so you
yes,
recultivate that habit of
yes.
adopting different points of views.
Okay, yeah, I can also see that in parents who have a very narrow perspective. Oh, I was raised this way by my parents, so you have to learn how to
It
live this
happens,
way.
yeah, yeah,
I'm even more lenient compared to my parents.
yeah, 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 yeah. It
So,
happens.
yeah. Anyway, so I guess you kind of explained some of what I wanted to ask about the capital T truth or the
Okay,
ontological truth. All right.
okay,
So I've experienced that because I've dealt with so many people from different cultures.
mm-hmm.
Like sometimes I deal with couples, so one partner will be from a different culture.
Yeah,
So it's sometimes starting off in my counseling work, I have this Judeo-Christian worldview about
yeah,
how a couple should be, you know. But in
yeah,
certain cultures, you know, having multiple partners is actually something accepted, or
yeah. Mm.
more patriarchal point of view, or a more, I don't know what you call that. But males are allowed to have different women.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So and I see a lot of that in the world today. Is the capital T truth. Well, Taiwan belongs to us, so we're gonna
yeah,
we're gonna bomb the hell out of you if you don't give it back to us.
yeah,
Uh, so that's the capital T truth.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
parents do that also. So in a micro and macro scale, it's happening. With
yeah,
how it
yeah,
affects human behavior. So
Yeah.
can you explain to our audience what we mean by the capital T truth, or maybe
Sure.
for even for the therapists out there
Yeah.
uh, who I see that a lot here, because I see clients who come to me and say that, oh, I came to you because you're not religious. You have a
Yeah.
scientific
Yeah. Yeah.
approach.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because when you say religious counseling, it has a certain agenda, or not agenda, but a certain limit to the
Mm-hmm.
kind of clientele you can help. So,
Some perspective. Yeah.
yeah,
Are you? Do you hear the noise behind me? Is that
no, 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 no,
no? Okay.
yeah,
So I keep going like that. I think there's a. It's
lawnmower
yeah,
or
a little
leaf
bit, but
blower.
yeah, something like that. But if you don't hear it, I'll just try to ignore it. Um, so the capital T truth. Okay, what are we talking about here? Well, there are different ways of relating to truth or reality. I would
Mhm,
say for me, there are like three main ways. One consists of saying there is a truth or reality that is objective, independent of our experience. It exists out there, and then we can have a perception of it. And
mhm,
often when we say that, often we say that we are all a bit biased, that we
mhm,
see a bit of it, but not completely. Science can help us see it better, but
mhm,
still, that always has to be refined. But there's that sense that that truth exists outside.
mhm,
It's independent of our perception. Then there is another position that's opposite to this one that says there is no truth outside of our experience. So it's all constructed. It's all in our perception, in our world. So there's
mhm,
nothing. When you see that opposition between these two, you can see already that there's going to be often a different way of responding to the idea of truth and knowing what's true or not. Like if you're completely in the position where you say there's no truth outside of experience, then everything can be true. It's you're not really looking for a criteria that's going to say this is what's right, what's wrong, what's true. It's always going to depend. It tends to lean toward relativism. It says, well, it depends. It depends on the context. It depends on who says that. It depends on what time of the day. It depends
mhm,
to the extreme. It depends all the time. Whereas when you have a position that's more essentialist, we could say, where the truth
mhm,
that's really intrinsic,
mhm,
uh, you're always going to refer to that criteria, saying, well, there are facts, there is evidence, there's something that's uh,
mhm,
that's not biased.
mhm,
In functional contextualism, the philosophy that's the underlying act and RFT and everything, we have a position that's the third position. That's what we call aontological, and basically it means you cannot interact with anything outside your experience. So
mhm,
the capital T truth has to be something you experience in some ways.
yeah,
Even if you're making hypothesis about it, it's still going to be part of your experience. So long story short, it's it's a take where you have to remain always very flexible, but also very coherent at the same time. And it can be very
mhm,
helpful when you interact with people and there are conflicts, because instead of thinking always, well, there's a truth outside of what we're saying here that's going to prove it, you know that
mhm,
you can't do that. You cannot go outside your experience in the end. So you're going to have to find a way to integrate all those perspectives.
mhm,
Uh, and you have to find it inside the world, in some ways. It's like, okay, well, all we have is our experience, so let's find a way to connect. Let's find a way to harmonize all our perspectives. That's kind of the idea here. That doesn't mean there cannot be truth, but it means that we have to find it inside the experiential world.
mhm. Well, I think one of our, I mean, probably the main criterion we have is workability.
Yeah,
So
that's
you
often what
may,
we use to say, okay, how are we gonna find a common ground? We're gonna say we're gonna have to define our common goals and then see what works. Yes, that's the typical pragmatic stance. Yeah.
yeah. Well, you know what? Uh, I was trained in the psychodynamic model of therapy.
Yeah.
So I I think this argument, I hear this sometimes, even from you know people I thought would know, that this pragmatism can turn into some kind of moral relativism, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But from my experience, from a psychodynamic background, I tend to view my clients with suspicion, like they have some kind of disorder. There's some kind of a dark past that's causing all this behavior and all that. But as I went through training in ACT and functional contextualism and the philosophy behind the science, I kind of have changed the worldview. And I can see this around the world now.
Okay.
You know, there are, for lack of a better example, let's say your president right now, President
Mm-hmm.
Trump. That group kind of sees the world with suspicion that people are going to be bad, there are good people, kind of
Mm-hmm.
bifurcating the world into good and bad. And I see that here also in our country.
Okay.
We kind of, even our movies reflect that, like
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
like two-dimensional characters or
Yeah. Yeah.
one-dimensional characters, one is totally evil and the other one is totally good. So, and I remember Steve Hayes once said that I've never seen a client who said my purpose in life is to kill people,
Yeah.
you know, even if he worked with people from inside the jail.
Yeah.
And that's given me a different perspective, like because I hang on to that philosophical view that humans are not homo economicus, or
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Thomas, I forget, is it Malthusian theory or Hobbesian theory, that
Mm-hmm.
we need a Leviathan government to control. We are like chimpanzees. We're gonna kill each
Mm-hmm.
other one day if we don't have a very powerful, strong government. You know, so I guess that's what keeps me grounded in seeing my clients
Mm-hmm.
from a
Yeah.
more positive point of view. Like,
Yeah.
I know you mean well, but what you're doing is not really producing the results, not workable.
Yeah. 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 No, I agree. I agree. I think that's you're making all good points here. A pragmatic stance, yes, it can lead to, like you said,
Relativism.
relativism, and you can justify anything because it works,
Yeah.
Uh, but if you expand your exploration of your purpose, why you want that goal, why it's important, you'll find that you cannot really escape the universal goals of humanity in the end. I think that's along those lines that Steve's saying he's never met someone whose purpose was to kill people. You might hear someone say that it's possible, but if you explore with them why they want to do that, what's important about that, you probably end up with um, needs, values, things that are much more universal than that. And the thing is, we often,
Pro-social. I
yeah,
think
and
the
that's,
term is pro-social, right?
yeah, I don't know, man, pro social. I think, yeah, sure. I mean, that's going to be part of the things that are going to emerge. But I
Mm-hmm.
think we can think of it more broadly than that. It's all humans need autonomy, exploration, connection,
Mm-hmm.
a sense of belonging. It kind of always revolves around those three, four main needs or values. So I don't think you can be really that it cannot really be arbitrary, let's say. Eh,
Mm-hmm.
all you need is to expand a little bit and you'll find that, oh well, in the end, I guess I'm human. What I want is something human, but the way I express that need, the way I try to get that need met can be problematic. For example, like someone who out of curiosity hurts other people, like that's the kind of things you can see in psychopathy. Well,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's problematic. It's problematic. Why? It's problematic for other people. I would say
Yeah.
probably problematic for that person too, because in the end, they uh, they end up being limited in their lives in some ways. Maybe they go to jail. Maybe they hurt people who they could be close to, and so it's pragmatism really has to be holistic in the end. It's like, well, it works, but all things considered, if I consider my whole experience, my whole life, and everybody in my life, in the end, what seems to be right?
Okay. All right. Thanks. Yeah.
It goes
So,
back to what I was saying earlier, just
mm,
quickly, is that, this idea of perspective taking, it's like, how can we integrate all the perspectives? Like, if
yes.
you want to know, is that a 6 or is it a 9? Well, you have to go all around it and see all the perspectives, and in the end, you will find the answer. And what is the answer once you've seen both sides? Is it a 6 or is it a 9? It's both, right?
Yeah. All
And
right.
it's
Yeah.
depends on what you want to do, then you can pick a perspective or another. It gives you the flexibility.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So I guess it's also one thing that kind of came up into my head, like
Yeah.
another question about what is it really that causes people to behave the way they behave in a very ineffective way.
Mm,
So I often hear Steve Hayes say that, sometimes we can do some really very stupid things
mm,
uh, if we're not, open to, we're emotionally avoidant and we're following rules
mm,
without sensitivity to the context. So I guess also you know, because I belong to a very Christian nation, I read the Bible and that says we are like sheep to be slaughtered. So we're like, we're very easily programmed to follow, you know,
mhm, mhm,
even when it's not effective. And Kelly Wilson, I'm quoting this from somebody who often quotes. It was Hank Robb actually who often quotes him. We do things that work for the moment, but not for our lives, right? So I don't know. For you, in a nutshell, if you can sum it all in one word, what do you think would explain the behaviors that kind of
mhm.
lead us to very even more difficult paths?
Well, I would say lack of awareness and a lack of coherence, lack of
Mm-hmm.
so it's what I was saying earlier, it's like you do something stupid, like you said, was I mean, it means that it's something that's not working. Like you said, it could be because it works in the short term but not in the long term, or it takes into
Yeah.
account one aspect of your life but not another aspect of your life. So what's missing is some perspective, maybe a perspective into the future, or a perspective, an empathetic perspective. Maybe what you're doing is good for you, but not good for others. Did you take that into account? And you can see that in kids when they're pretty self-centered. They are not taking into account the needs of other people or other kids. If you let
Mm-hmm.
them choose, they will often go with whatever works for them. So you have to teach
Mm-hmm.
them that. They say, hey, you're eating all the candies, can you give some to your brother? It's simple things like that
Yes.
at first. And
Yeah.
so that's the kind of thing that I think that at the core of issues we have, is that we're missing something. We're always missing something in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
um, so I think what I want is to cultivate the curiosity toward what might be missing. Is there a perspective that I'm not taking right now? Am I considering the future? Am I considering the past? Am I considering some of my needs? So that's an aspect of awareness of these different perspectives, and then the integration of all those perspectives, because that can be another thing that can get us to make stupid things, like you said. Maybe I'm
Mm-hmm.
able to consider the present and the future, but not together.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe sometimes I'm into the future, but I forget about the present. I cannot
Mm-hmm.
enjoy the moment right now because I'm thinking of the future. Or maybe I'm thinking of the present right now. I'm doing things that are pleasant right now, but I forgot that there are long-term consequences. So what's key is to integrate both and say, okay, there's something important now, but there's something important in the future too. So what is it that I want to do considering all that? And to me, that's in a nutshell the process that if you can
Yes.
develop it, you're more likely to be happy in life. You're able to be open to all the perspectives potentially, be
Mm-hmm.
aware of everything. It's the concept of mindfulness, it's like being um, aware of everything, but it's a stance. You cannot really be literally aware of everything, but at least you can be open to everything, and and move toward a sense of integration of all that. That's that's
Yeah.
that's pretty simple in a way, right? But of course, in practice, it's complex.
Yeah. Actually, I heard in one of his recent interviews, not a it's a group discussion with I think Steve Hayes with Paul Gilbert, these
Mm-hmm.
four people, four men talking
Mm-hmm.
about
Oh, yeah. I didn't see it, but I see what you mean. I saw it on social media, but I didn't see the discussion. Yeah.
yes, and he had these two words that really struck me, is this quest for being whole and free.
Yeah.
So that really struck me because you use the word integration instead
Yeah.
of this disintegration a lot
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
when I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
training with you. And
Mm.
I never really understood the term. I heard that even in graduate school in psychodynamic theory.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I now realize being whole means, being open to all those feelings that you have. You don't
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
this disintegrate the angry part of you or the sad
Mm.
part of you. They're all one, and then
Yeah. Yeah.
free means being able to choose from different options freely.
Yep. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's in the end, this concept of integration, you find it in a lot of psychotherapy, philosophy, spiritual traditions. I think they're probably in all of them in some ways. When we talk about acceptance, it's a form of
Mm,
integration. Compassion is a form of integration.
mm,
Uh, there's always some elements of coming together, moving toward a sense of wholeness. Uh,
mm,
that's one of the things I think we can consider being a basic need or value of all humans in the end.
mm. All right. Okay. Now we'll go back into history again. Now this time I'm going to talk about Walden 2.
Oh
All
yeah,
right.
okay. Well done
Okay.
too. Mm.
So in his book Walden 2, there are some sections there that says that Frazier, the character who's supposed to represent what Skinner wants
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah.
in a utopian society. Well, he said that they don't give out recognitions to people.
Mm.
When you're a
Mm.
doctor, you just did your job, no special recognition or whatever.
Mm. Mm.
And I realized China is doing the same thing. I mean, of
Mm.
course, it's not a perfect society, but remember Jack Ma, the president or the founder of Alibaba.
Mm.
So he lost prominence because the government started to want to control him from being too
Mm.
high profile.
Okay.
And I've heard Steve say that okay, there's no such thing as that quest for immortality. Because I also
Mm.
come from that wing, that humanistic wing of existentialism.
Yeah, yeah,
So we're always wanting to build legacy, wanting
yeah, 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 yeah.
to find that immortality. I
Yeah.
realized, yeah, maybe it's just part of our ego trip or something.
Uh-huh.
Uh, so what do you think? Will it serve our planet better if we stop, emulating people? Because like this comparison framing, it has a
Yeah.
positive and negative side, right?
Sure, sure. Yeah, yeah.
So we see that in our clients, they look at their social media accounts
Mm.
and they compare themselves of how unsuccessful they are compared to
Mm.
the
Mm.
very curated posts that they see uh, on their phones. So I guess that's my question to you. Would it make a better society? Would you agree with Skinner that we should?
Not really, because
Mhm,
I think whenever we are trying to to establish one way of thinking is going to be good and eliminate the other way, I think that's when things start to be problematic. So should we be more like collectivist because being individualistic is bad? That's probably not going to work. The opposite is not going to work either. I think you always have to find a form of integration of both.
mhm,
It's always interesting that people who write Utopia didn't live like that so often. You know,
mhm,
Skinner wrote Weldon too, okay, but he didn't live in Weldon too. And
mhm,
you would say, well, that's because I lived under contingencies and I have a history that led me to prefer living differently. But that's precisely my
mhm,
point: is we need to shape people to prefer working. Yeah, but maybe also nobody is ever gonna want to live like that. And maybe we should just acknowledge
Mm,
that and consider that there is something interesting in the idea. But maybe if we push it too much, it's always going to backfire. Uh, my sense is, as at this stage of my understanding, expertise, but also just life, is that that's what humans are. We are individuals and we are very social at the same time. And I think you
mhm,
always need to find a good balance between both. It's easy to stigmatize the idea of having an ego, but at the same time, there is perhaps something that's very natural and functional about having a sense of self and comparing yourself to others to some extent, as a way of finding what's special, what you can do even to the group, that's a difference, a contribution to the group in a unique way. I think it's always going to be a dynamic.
mhm,
Like we were saying earlier about even universal needs or values. In some ways, I'm like everybody, but also I'm completely different. The way I express those values is always going to be very different. If you want to think of utopia, I would say it's a system where you you find a good balance between both. And I think Skinner probably would partly agree with that because for example, there is still like, well, I would have to reread it. I haven't read it in a long time. I'm trying to think what you would think of things like competition and things like that. But yeah, I think it's possible, for example, to have sport and competition where, yeah, it's individualistic to some extent because you want to be better than other people. But is there a way where you can be integrated into a framework where the loser is still happy and the winner is not so arrogant? And I think it's a matter also of mitigating the what you get from that. It doesn't have to be, like kids when they participate to competition, but then nobody wins because we're so afraid that they're going to that their feelings are going to be hurt. We can find something more in between where it's um, it's fun to compete, it's fun to win, but it's also fun to lose. It doesn't matter that much, right? That's where I would
mhm,
bring perspective. It's like I can be happy for the person who wins, because there's something
mm,
of me in there. That's how I relate to people who are successful when I'm at my best. I'm looking at people who have like a incredible life. It seems like, say,
mm,
a movie actor who has a lot of money and is famous and is doing these incredible things. And in some ways, it's, oh, I wish I could have that life. It seems great. And yeah, that could bring up envy and jealousy, But it can also, in a way that's a little more connected. Sometimes I'm thinking that's cool, Like in a way, I can. It's like they're living a life that I'm not living, but knowing that they're living that life, seeing them live that life, there is a bit of me in that, because we are humans.
mhm, mhm,
It's like, people will go to space and do things that you'll never do, but there's something cool about seeing your human brothers and sisters do something that you will never do, I think it's easier
mhm,
to think that way when you think of your family members, like your children or your siblings. I think it's easier to feel that way, this sense of expansion of yourself. I never got to travel around the world, but you, my son, you did it, and I feel
mm,
it's great. Or
mhm,
you're going to become a doctor. I was not able to be a doctor, but I worked hard, and you were able to. People often sense that's continuity. I think if you can develop that sense of continuity with the world in general, maybe not just humans, I think it can. That's pretty healthy, So it's collectivist in a way because you get into that sense of interconnection, but it remains individual too because it's like also I have my own feelings, my own view, my own history, and that can also be celebrated. That would be my take. And I don't think that's something that was explicit like that in Walden too. I think that's probably a little too collectivist, I would say, in my view.
yeah, I actually did some research on that.
Yeah.
Actually consulted ChatGPT, and
Mm-hmm.
ChatGPT did say that Skinner said that.
Oh
And
yeah.
the explanation that ChatGPT said was indicated was uh, it's more about intrinsic motivation, that you want to be a doctor because you want to be a doctor, not to be
Yeah.
famous
Yeah.
or someone. And I can
Yeah.
see how that happens in real world, right? Right?
Yeah.
Like some people have no expertise in doing something, but they end up being there because they're very popular.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's
You know,
probably pretty
because
common. Yeah.
it gives extrinsic rewards, you know,
Yeah. 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 It's
and
a strong motivation.
you can you can go through a whole life being extrinsically rewarded and
Sure. Yeah.
die
Mm.
never really finding who you want to be, really, you know.
That's
So
what in psychoanalysis it's called the false self, I think, or it may not be just in psychoanalysis, but it's like when you develop a whole life, but it's not the life that you're supposed to live because you're always trying to fit the expectations of others, and that's
yes,
traumatic. That's probably the thing that's
yes,
the worst for a human. Like you didn't
yes, well,
you didn't meet your own personal needs. Yeah,
yes, well, that's tragic, right? Anyway,
tragic for sure.
yes,
Yeah.
which brings, you just mentioned that, and kind of leads me to my next question. My next
Mm-hmm.
question would be, you know, I'm I sort of kind of understand what, whereas I've read a few book, a couple of books maybe about these psychological tests or
Yeah.
testing intelligence
Yeah.
that we still do up until today, general intelligence, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So we still do that here. I guess we do it in universities in the US too, right? You got to be good at this, and this. Otherwise, you
Uh-huh.
don't belong here. You know,
Okay. Yeah.
kind of like fitting the individual to the context rather than the context fitting the individual. That's
Mm-hmm.
what you, but that's what I heard you say earlier. So I
Mm-hmm.
guess I don't know. Do you have the same views about how we try to put numbers on people, trying to judge their future success based on testing, their whatever intelligence, personalities,
Mm-hmm.
uh, uh, describing them in terms of, okay, your narcissistic personality disorder, your
Yeah. Yeah.
borderline personality disorder, your this disorder, you're a walking
Yeah. Yeah.
disorder. I don't know. What are your views? I never asked you about this because
No.
we
Uh,
hardly talk about it, but it's part of, I think what Steve Hayes is advocating for, and I
yeah.
really feel that because in my own personal experience, I felt that we had, when I was growing in elementary and high school, there were star sections and not star non-star sections.
All right.
It's like the smartest go to the certain group of classes, while the
Hmm.
average or the below average ones go to a certain group.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
uh,
when I was growing up at school, even elementary school,
yeah.
uh, or grades were uh, known to the whole class, and at
Oh
the end
wow.
of every semester, you'd have your average grade, and we were ranked, and you would know the ranking of every kid, even from the age of 6.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it was like first, and you have the second, third, fourth. I think of that, and nowadays, I don't know how it is in France now, but in the US, I don't think that you would find places like that. I think they would be considered incredibly, uh,
Insensitive.
yeah, to say the least. Yeah. Uh, but yeah, so one of my views on that, I think but it's kind of similar to what I said earlier. You cannot eliminate it completely. There'll always be a process of conceptualization to organize our experiences. You want to recruit someone. How do you know that if they are good? Yeah, ideally, you can recruit them, you test them, you see if they are really good. Maybe even you train them, but in practice, especially in big communities, and that was the point of Skinner, by the way, with the one and two. Perhaps the one point that we can take from his ideas that large communities are often problematic. There's maybe his point, well done too, is that you can really not make it work if you have two large communities. And it's partly why we create those categories and tests, because you don't have the time to really meet the person and really know them and see if they are really good for that particular job, or So you end up thinking, okay, well, how could we measure that, with the questionnaire, with a couple of items that will predict what they're able to do? And so it's practical to some extent. Then the problem is when we start to reify those categories, we start to say, well, okay, since you answered this thing to that item, it means all these things. And then we
Mm,
think of it in a way that's way too rigid, too mechanistic. We forget that answering a question is a behavior and that it depends also on the context. Maybe you said one thing one point, but maybe you change at another point. I know that good tests are supposed to be consistent over time, but there are still so many factors that can come into you answering a particular question. Um, and it's hard to identify an item that's unambiguous too. Um, so if my position is hmm, not well, I guess it's a non-judgmental position about it first, because it's easy to criticize it and to say it's bad, but then what do you offer instead? Uh, yeah, the ACT position has always been to promote process-based approaches instead of categorical approaches, and we tend to be critical regarding the DSM because we think that it's too mechanistic. It assumes an origin of problems that's not really functional and contextual. It's more based on a medical model that there is a problem inside the person instead of thinking more in terms of the dynamic with the context.
yes.
But at the same time, you think of the processes of ACT and things like or the, the the processes that we identified as being problematic, like experiential avoidance, fusion, lack of contact with the present moment. And in some ways, there are also categories. You can also categorize someone based on whether they are fused or whether they are avoidant. So you cannot really escape a system of conceptualization in the end. What I think you
Mm,
need is what we said earlier is a good philosophy that helps you relate to those categories
mm,
without the rigidity, like
yeah.
without that capital T truth, like, okay, it's really like that intrinsically, but remain flexible and pragmatic with those categories. That's probably the most important in the end.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, you segued again to one of the questions I wanted to ask you,
You see?
because I have this theory in mind. It's just me, not anybody else. We're just going to shoot the breeze here. Uh,
Okay.
I'm kind of, because when we developed language, we started looking for a sense of meaning and purpose for our finitude, right? We're all gonna die someday, right?
Okay. Mm,
So that's a reality. I remember Urban Yalom, an existential therapist,
mm,
write that the mother of all religions is death.
okay.
So we're trying to solve this issue, this problem about the finite nature of our lives. And I think historically, I would say it started with the Greeks, with Plato. What is the meaningful life? What is the fulfilling life? Eudaimonia. And then we we started to think like, okay, there's another dimension, there's a heaven, there's a hell, then there comes religion, there's good and evil behavior, classifying ineffective and effective behavior as good and evil. And
Mm,
then I think, if my history serves me right, in the mid 20th century or the early 20th or late 19th century, we started to think about, well, with the advent of medicine, you know, we classify ineffective and effective behavior as disease, like
mm-hmm,
the
mm-hmm,
disease model, right? Like, oh, we can have these drugs that can address that bad behavior, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then I don't know, and then there's uh, science, and then I see when I go into act, then we go back to wisdom, just like going back to the Greeks, you know.
Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It's just me wanting to hear your views about this or your ideas
Yeah.
about this. So I
Mm,
think even the first article that Steve wrote about spirituality, making sense of It's actually, for me, I think it's a scientific explanation of why we think we are mind and body, like we're spirit
Mhm.
and flesh,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah,
So it's
yeah,
a more scientific view of what spirituality means, and that's based on
yeah,
didactic framing, right?
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not sure. So I don't know what are your views about this.
Uh, I don't know. I don't know when it started, I'm not sure it started with the Greeks or with humans.
Yeah.
Uh, I think it's one key element in what you're saying here, and again, it links to dialectic framing, perspective taking.
Mhm.
We are aware of our own death, right? That's often a
Yeah.
defining feature of humanity. Although it's kind of hard to know what animals or
Yes.
know or don't know because we are not. So it seems like they are not able to do things that we can do, but at the same time, it's kind of hard to know exactly what's specific about that.
Matt, can I say something?
Sure.
I'm asking this question because I think you know the saying, when you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So we're in my society, we're kind of still stuck in that age, or even,
Hmm.
some it's happening in certain parts of your country also. When we bifurcate people into good and bad,
Yeah.
that some people are totally bad, some people are totally good, you know.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think that's we're kind of stuck in, from my perspective, we're kind of stuck in that feudalistic or dark ages mode of thinking,
I see what
that
you
we
mean.
try to solve problems by getting rid of the bad people and rewarding the good people, right?
Yeah, it's a categorical, mechanistic view of the world, right? Where
Yes.
there are
and
good
and you
things,
s-
bad things, and they're separated like that. Yeah. Mm.
and we see that in our jails. They're packed like sardines.
Oh yeah.
A jail that can contain 100 people now contains 500.
Wow.
So it's like hell on earth. When I
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
El
Yeah.
Salvador, well, you should try our prisons here.
Hey, wow.
In the kind of humidity we have, no air conditioning, there's four of you packed in one cell, or no, 10 of you packed in one cell, and the people sleep sideways on the floor, you know, with rats, cockroaches, and all that,
Yeah.
So this is the reason why I asked this, some because we don't evolve into some a better explanation. Like I know you're from Europe originally, that they are into rehabilitation rather than mass incarceration, right?
Yeah, it is
Uh,
different
uh,
countries, but I guess perhaps on average, yeah, probably, yeah.
some countries like Iceland and Norway, I
Especially
think,
in comparison to what you described, apparently in the Philippines. Yeah, that's
yeah, even in the U.S., there's mass
yeah,
incarceration, right?
yeah.
President Carter was
And I
against
know
that.
that prisons in France are overpopulated too, and they are often called out for the disrespect of human rights. So I guess I'm not sure.
Hmm.
It's probably
Yeah,
better than what you describe, but you can still see that um, it's
yeah,
still based on a system where bad behavior is punished.
yes,
The it's always a dilemma, right? To know what to do from a humanistic perspective, because you can understand or try to understand why people behave the way they behave, so it feels less categorical, right? It's less they are bad,
yes,
we're good. It becomes a little more like, well, if you had been through the same things, the same histories, I think maybe that would be you in that prison right now. So
yes,
it's more complex, right? That's what we
yes,
like in
yes.
functional contextualism. It's not so mechanistic. On the other hand, there is the reality of what we can do now, and it's yeah. I guess the hope is that as humanity evolves, we continue to get better at building societies, designing ways of living together that are more consistent with
Hmm.
humanistic philosophies, right?
Yeah.
And perhaps if we look back, that's what we're doing. Perhaps it's not linear, but
Hmm.
overall, perhaps we can say that we keep getting better at that. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think we get better overall if we consider the whole humanity? I mean, there are places in the world may not feel that way, but
Well, I remember one famous quote from President George Bush, "The axis of evil." You know,
Mm, mm.
so you kind of brand every country like that. I mean,
Yeah,
countries that don't align with, let's say, democracies or whatever.
yeah,
So I think, I don't know, it's not effective because we're running into walls.
yeah. No, of course, but you know, it's I'm thinking if we expand our perspective in time and we don't look just at what someone said at some point or but a
Mm,
really bigger trend, you know, it's easy to look at, especially nowadays, you know, with the way we get news every day, and it's can be hard to keep that broader perspective. We think that what's happening right
yeah.
now it's unique and it's terrible, and that, but then if you look, you know, like for example, when we talk about, often I hear people say the world is so divided right now, you know, like is
Yeah.
it divided right now than it was before? Like
Mm,
we keep talking about the violence in like in the US, but you see all the political assassinations in the 60s. I mean,
mm,
not to minimize what might be happening now, but it's
mm,
easy to think that what's going on right now is terrible and
mhm,
forget how things have evolved.
mhm,
Uh, so I'm you know I'm open to, I'm an expert in history, so
mhm,
I cannot pretend that I know if things are getting better. But if you
mm,
look over centuries, I
mhm,
would personally would lean toward thinking that we continue to get better at being
mhm,
consistent with humanistic views. That
mhm,
doesn't mean that the future is necessarily bright, because you know it's not
mhm.
linear. Perhaps there are things that, after all,
Yeah.
world war and nuclear bomb could erase everything at any point also. Uh,
Yes.
but you know, it's interesting what we live right now, because yeah, in a way, you could see that the biggest risk of annihilation, you know, right now, and at the same time, look at what happens. You know, it's like where precisely we don't want it to happen. Like technically, there's several countries that could decide to use a nuclear bomb, and that could lead
Mhm.
to an escalation and everything, and yet it's not happening.
Yeah.
Uh, that's also something to take into account, that maybe
Mm.
as humans we become also more and more able to address those issues.
Okay.
After all, you know, in the past we would have killed our neighbors just because they had stolen something from us, and nobody would
Yeah.
care because that would be just the right thing to do. Uh, I don't know. I don't
All right. Okay. All right. So let me come to my more, let's say, interesting questions, more fun questions, I guess.
know.
All right. So I saw the Paris Olympics
Oh yeah. Oh
opening ceremony, not the
yeah.
whole Olympics, of course.
Yeah.
Parts of it, not the whole ceremony. It's like 5 hours, I guess. So I was so entranced by, or when they played John Lennon's song Imagine.
Mm,
It's probably my all-time favorite, not just because of the music, but also the lyrics. And that's been my vision for a better world. Like, I want it's just to be one human race,
mm,
especially
mm,
the lyrics that go, imagine there are no countries, there's no religions, people
mm,
living life in peace and living for the moment.
mm, mm,
So that means, like you said, living for the moment. Maybe you need to look into the future, but sometimes
mm.
living for the moment is better because you're just enjoying coffee with Matt here. you know, so something like that. So I don't know. What's your if you have a song that would carry a message that you want the world to be, what would that be?
I don't know if I have one about the world, and
Or maybe your
on
life,
top of my
or
mind.
yeah.
Uh, you know, I when you describe the lyrics of that John Lennon song, it's interesting because that my mind goes to it's a bit naive, you know. Uh, and not in a good way, you know, because there's naive that's innocent and good, but like, what does that mean? No countries, no religion, and everything. It's like the idea that if you erase differences, it's going to be great. I don't think that's probably what he means, but that's what he said. It seems, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think it's not the. I mean, of course, if you look at differences as the origin of problems, then you want to eliminate differences. But you have to be careful with that because that's also usually the source of problems too. So I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
there's a song that celebrates both. You know, that's a threat for all my responses today. It's like taking into account that dialectic that there is in everything, pretty much. You know, uh, so there's a song from I like from Pink Floyd. I like that they have lyrics that are complex and ambiguous. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it's more open to interpretation, you know. That's probably what I like in general, I guess, because it allows for what I'm saying. It's more integration
Mm-hmm.
when it's more ambiguous, you know. When you start to
Mm-hmm.
state things a little too literally,
Mm-hmm.
then it becomes a little too categorical too. So I guess
Yes,
I like
yes.
that. And one that I'm thinking of that kind of relates to this topic here, it's called On the Turning Away.
Turning away.
On the turning away. And it talks about, I think it's viewed as the most political, explicitly political song of Pink Floyd. And the
Mm-hmm.
lyrics are relatively easy to understand in comparison to others that are more abstract. But it talks about the idea of not turning away from other people's suffering and
Mm-hmm.
taking things seriously and not just being a
Mm-hmm.
bystander of suffering. It's nice. I've liked this song for a long time, but I pay attention to the lyrics only recently because, you know, since it's not my first language, I'm used to listening to songs and not pay attention to the lyrics often. And I actually went to look at the lyrics and I realized, oh yeah, I didn't realize even it was talking about that. Um, so I think I like it because it's about what I said earlier, the developing awareness, you know, not
Mm-hmm.
looking away,
Mm-hmm.
at least paying attention, right?
Mm-hmm.
The thing I don't like really in our I guess our dark sides, you know, is the denial, you know, when that process where we don't see what's before our eyes, you know. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
there's in the news in France right now. I keep following the news in France a lot. They're talking a lot these days about a school where for decades there is a lot of physical and sexual abuse and
Mm-hmm.
perpetrated by maybe something like 30 different teachers and educators. And it lasted for like 5 decades. Crazy, right? You think, especially in a country like France, and it's like a democracy and there's information and thing. And they're talking about the denial from everybody because it's, yeah, in a way it was hidden, but it was also known by everybody. And and like, why didn't people say something? Why, how could they ignore that? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and that's was something that's always fascinated me and continues to fascinate me is like uh, it's a thing to not be aware of certain things because you don't have
Mm-hmm.
access to information, that perspective, you know, you have not had access to
Mm-hmm.
that perspective. But when it's before your eyes, you have access to it and you still don't see it.
Mm-hmm.
That is really something that I find you started as one of your first questions, you know, in a nutshell, what causes suffering, and now you're asking me about a song and about a better world. Why I'm connecting both here is that the how can we overcome denial?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then
Yeah.
what do we do with that? It's another thing, it's another step. We often rush into taking action, but for me it
Mm-hmm.
would be, let's start with if we could truly see what we don't see, that would
Yeah.
be a pretty big step.
Yeah, there was some big news here. Even our president, the president of the Philippines, got into this
Mm-hmm.
discussion about a foreign blogger. He's a Russian American,
Oh,
who was making a lot of let's say controversial videos,
mm-hmm.
kind of trying to get views online. He has like millions of followers online, and he ended up in one of our jails, for
Okay.
doing what he did. So uh kind of harassing people on the street.
Mm,
And I heard some of our politicians say, well, you're gonna rot in one of our jails.
okay.
Welcome to the Philippines. You're not gonna
Mm,
get away with that. See how it's like to live in our jails for
mm,
at least 5 years.
mm,
Well, 99.99% of those people in jail are Filipinos like you.
mm, mm-hmm.
And you're proud to say that our jails are a hellhole.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they know that. But
Mm.
since they belong to these political dynasties, it's very hard to be sensitive to
That's
that
it. Yeah. Yeah.
context.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's what you mean by denial.
Yeah, it's the thing. It's not just seeing. It's context sensitivity. It's complex and it's dimensional. You can
Yes.
you be aware of something but not respond to it. Like people will say, I know that if I keep smoking, I might develop cancer. It's not good for me. But it's not the full awareness of really being in touch with the consequences.
Yes.
It's hard to be aware. It's never completely over. The depth of what you can discover. Um, it's interesting that you know uh, it seems like humanity continues to develop tools to be more aware of. Like the more information, always more information. I'm
Yes.
thinking about uh, like the news and what happened when we started to have TV networks that give the news all day long. So we have so much information. It used to be just at the time of the day you watch TV
Mm-hmm.
and you will
Mm.
know what happened during the day, and then until the next night. But now it's
Yes.
continuously and through multiple networks, and then of course you have
Yes.
social media and everything. So in a way, we have
Yes.
access to everything and more and more and more and more and more. And at the
Mm.
same time, um, you can maybe also learn to be insensitive because there's so much that you start to not care.
Mm. Yeah.
Every day there is something to be concerned about, but then the next day comes and there's something else. So you're
Yes.
aware, but you're not. But you can also be in denial in that you stop caring. It's complex. It's very complex. We also
Yes.
it relates to Walden two thing. It's that can we actually really care about people who live so far away in the world? Is that possible? Is that
Yeah.
not maybe too much to ask to
Mm.
humans? Like to
Yeah.
feel something like you hear there's an earthquake thousands of miles away and people die.
Mm.
uh,
Mm.
you're not feeling something. Is that wrong? Is that maybe just too much to
Too
ask
much. Yeah.
you to feel something? you know
Yes.
Whereas if it's your neighbor, that would concern you. And we often stigmatize, criticize humans because they say, oh yeah, you care about it because you know these people, but you don't care about people. And maybe that's normal. Maybe that's but I don't know, maybe
Yes.
we're also evolving toward caring for more and more and more and farther and farther and farther, that maybe that's part of that transcendence developing. I think both are true. It's just that it's a process, and perhaps that's what's happening. We're developing more and more awareness, but sometimes we just don't know what to do with it.
Mm. Okay. All right. So let's go to my last question.
Last question already. All right.
And it
What's your last question?
concerns it concerns sex.
That's why you kept it for the last one.
No, 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 not really. I think I have a theory. It's just my own theory. Like anything good about this planet, we tend to create a culture around it. For
Okay.
example, food,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's pleasurable to eat, right? To
Yeah.
drink,
Okay.
and
Mm-hmm.
we create certain cultures around it, right? Certain rules on how to eat. Like in
Yeah.
Asia, slurping is very much a compliment. In
Yeah. Yeah.
in the United States, it's gross, right?
Mm-hmm.
For
Mm-hmm.
Americans. Uh, and you're originally from France. And
Yeah.
one of these good things that I think we built a whole culture, a whole set of rules around is sex.
Mm-hmm.
So you're originally from France, and I saw, like I said, saw the Paris Olympics, and one of the scenes there was a threesome
Uh-huh. Yeah.
between
Yeah.
um, uh, uh, by two guys
Dancers.
who
Yeah. Yeah, I
are
remember.
probably depicting bisexualism, and a woman who's
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
bisexual also, right? Or trans transdressing or transgender. I don't know. All right.
Mm.
So there was a lot of this, and it sparked quite some controversies in some religious circles, like
Yeah.
the depiction of the Last Supper, all that, So,
Which was
but
not, by the way, that was not the Last Supper. That's
well, that's
no,
how
no,
the
but
some
that's what people thought, and that's partly why
yes,
it's a controversy. But it was not the Last Supper. It was something else. It was the Bacchus feast or something like that, which refers to a Greek, I think,
yes,
Greek mythology, and not the Christian mythology.
yes,
But anyways,
and yeah. So I've struggled with this issue about sexuality for a long time using ACT,
yeah.
and I found it difficult to find answers, and because if you're a smoke, let's say you have an anger issue, right? And you
Mm,
end up getting doing something ineffective again because of a burst of anger.
mm,
Well, that's part of the learning process, right? But we have a culture of monogamy here in our country,
mm,
and it's hard to accept people who cheat,
mm,
quote
mm,
unquote cheat, or have affairs. So we built this sort of culture wherein, oh, there are certain rules about sex you should, but in the end, what ends up happening is people separate. So the consequences are so much bigger compared to, let's say, one affair.
mhm. Okay.
So so and let's say, oh, I don't like my child because he or she is bisexual or
Mm,
homosexual. You
mhm.
know, uh, she should he or she should turn into he or she, whatever it
Okay.
is.
Yeah.
He or she shouldn't be a they. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think with these, with what I saw in the Paris Olympics, I think I don't know, there seems to be a more openness to a diversity in terms of sexual habits or sexual
Mhm,
preferences,
mhm,
or this whole culture we built, that it's not an ontological truth, that
mm, mhm.
certain things about marriage
Yeah.
or about monogamy
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Yeah.
polygamy. Because in our country, we allow Muslims to have several wives, and that's not
Okay.
against the rules, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Because that's, so I guess that's the thing. I don't know. Uh, I'm starting to piece together the puzzle, and it ends up with me saying that, okay, well, you have to make a choice here. I
Yeah.
mean, are you gonna break up this relationship because of an affair, or
Yeah.
are you going to live with that memory and still understand that your
Yeah.
partner, eh,
Yeah.
there's also a risk that he or she will still cheat in the future, but are
Yeah.
you willing to live with that,
Yeah.
for the sake of something more important to you, something like
Mhm,
that,
mhm, mhm,
right?
mhm.
Because there's a
Yeah.
lot of pressure about, hey, your partner is a pervert or something like that,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think, I mean, it connects to what you were saying earlier about rules and perspective taking. It's like
Yes.
you can be in a context where it's allowed to have multiple perspectives, or you can be in a context where it's not allowed to have multiple perspectives. Um, you know, it makes sense to want to prevent the multiplicity of perspective taking because that's also how you maintain coherence. The more perspective you have, the more
Mm.
difficult it is to maintain coherence. That's why conservative societies tend to want, yeah, to to keep traditions, to keep things the way they are, and they tend to be more controlling and to um, limit freedom to some extent because
Mhm.
of that concern that you're going to lose the sense of unity, the sense of coherence
Mm.
and integrity. There's always a dynamic between complexity and simplicity, you know, coherence
Mm.
and transformation. So progressive, they tend to want things to be more flexible and changing and allow
Mm.
people to do that. But I think you can never, again, get rid of one side of the dynamic. It's always going to need a
Mm.
dialectic between both.
Mm.
Um, so you look at the society and you say, "Wow, how can they consider that it's illegal to have several wives?" And then another country, it's like, how can they consider it's illegal to be to choose your sexuality? And um, yeah, what's your question really here? You know, I can. I'm observing that. I don't like when people are punished obviously for their sexual preferences. Uh, but then again, you know, yeah, people can consider that having several wives is a sexual preference. You know, oh yeah, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's for me, it's always a matter of expanding our awareness of all the perspectives. Like,
Mm.
why? How can we integrate the perspective of everybody who's being hurt right now, you know, or what's
Mm.
going to is it going to hurt? And my sense is that you never get a final answer. You can never really say, okay, we found the right way and that's never going to change. There's always going to be
Mm.
yes but
Mm.
yes but what happens if, you know, like you can allow people to choose what the way they want to live. Oh, but what
Mm.
if they are not really choosing because they are actually influenced by their culture to choose that. That's not really what they
Mm.
want. And that there are controversies like that in France around the Muslim women, how they're dressed, and say, well, the right position, the humanistic position, should be to let them choose to do what they
Yes.
want, because that's how you liberate people to let them. But then there are people who say, well, but no, because they are forced to wear a certain um,
Yeah.
uh, you know, to dress in a certain way, and so we cannot just say let them choose, because actually they are forced to. And even
Mm.
if we see women who say, no, I'm choosing, I really want to, nobody's forcing me, and then people
Mm.
say, yeah, but you lived in an environment that influenced you toward making that choice, you are not really free. You see,
Mm.
it's never going to end. And I think
Mm.
that's just, you have to acknowledge that. You know, you and I, we know that it's something that plays out in therapy, you know, in coaching. It's that you
Mm.
want to help people being more free, be able to make their own decision, and yet they are not free from influences, of course. There is
Mm.
always a culture, and it's the point is not to deny the influence of that culture, because you live in a culture, and it's nice also to have that influence, that history. Um,
Mm.
so I think what I again, I go back to my idea of what would be an ideal community. It's a community where we can reflect and try to find what works for everybody, but also acknowledge that maybe things will continue to change. Um,
All right.
it's
Okay.
it's it's sad when a community prevents people from asking questions, reflect, you know, explore other ways. You cannot even do that. That's the
Yeah.
worst, right? Dictatures and dogmatic, where you cannot even write your own opinion. You cannot even um, make a different proposition about how we could live together. No, you're already imprisoned or killed. You cannot even think differently. That's the worst, really.
All right. Okay. Well, unfortunately, we ran out of time again. So I don't know.
See you next
Someday
year.
we can do this without time.
I think
Anyway.
you should put together all the or podcasts, and at some point maybe release a whole thing together. And
Uh, All right. Okay,
Well,
Matt.
thank you for inviting me again for this anniversary, and I always enjoyed your questions and your perspective on all these topics. It's always fun to interact with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Likewise. Okay. I'll see you next year, maybe.
All
Hopefully.
right,
All right.
all
Bye
right,
bye.
bye.